The recording, please. All right, great. I want to welcome everybody to our February Public Health Preparedness webinar. We've got a really great speaker tonight, and we're going to be talking about a topic that is really important both for people on a personal level and also when you are in a leadership position or working in a team format. So I'm really looking forward to learning a lot about imposter syndrome tonight. But before I get started, I just want to kick it off with a couple announcements about our program. So I'm going to do a quick screen share. Uh, can you guys see that? Okay, perfect. So, all right. So, sorry, I don't know why there are subtitles on. But this is us, as you all know. This is a screenshot from our website. So if you've got any questions on our program, you can head over there. So we do this webinar series every month. We do it on the first Wednesday of the month during the academic school year. So we take off the summer because we have a slightly reduced student load and people's schedules are kind of crazy. So first Wednesday of the month, tonight is kicking off our spring semester. So all of these webinars are recorded and they are kept here on our public health preparedness seminar site. Our great instructional designer Tulipole maintains that for us. And he also has a YouTube channel that has all of these. All of our webinars are amazing from a public health preparedness standpoint. We've got a number of pertinent topics like public health and wastewater. We've had suicide prevention. We've had caregiver fatigue, AI, and public health. We're trying to show the breadth and depth of the public health preparedness field. So there's a lot of really great stuff in there that you can find and you can apply it to your classes, or you can look at it from a career building standpoint, because a lot of the speakers also give some career advice. But there are two specific webinars that I do want to call out. One of them is we had the DRPH Penn State professors on, and they were talking about how to use our MPS degree and go into a terminal degree program. So whether you're looking to a DRPH or a PhD program, that one has a lot of great information in it. The other one, which I apologize, I did not put a bullet on here, is we have a couple webinars from Andrew Dudash, who is the Penn State librarian, who is the subject matter expert in Homeland Security and public health for us. He has done a lot with making like reference guides for us and putting information up, which there is going to be a link on when you log into Canvas and you are looking at the left side of your page, there is a library link. Tulipole, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's there. But one great thing that Andrew does is in his webinars, he walks us through different ways to search for things, different resources that people might not know are available. If I had met him before I went for my PhD, my life would have been a lot easier. So check that out. You'll thank him later. Secondly, since we are getting close to commencement, we are currently looking for nominations for our annual Student Achievement Award. This is something that is awarded to a graduating student or two graduating students. There's a $500 prize. Students can self-nominate or faculty can nominate. And we're looking at the whole picture. Like, we have a number of students who excel in the classroom, and that's obviously important, but we also like to read about what kinds of professional accomplishments and what kinds of community accomplishments and those kinds of things that you're bringing to the table. So if you are graduating, check out this site and feel free to nominate yourself. And for any faculty that are available, please check this out and nominate one of our very deserving students. We have a ton of them, so check that out. We've got great news about our emergency management club. We have finally been able to fill all of our board members. So now we are just signing the final papers to be Penn State official. Once we get that last signature from Penn State, then we can go submit that paperwork to IAEM, and we've got the number of members, the number of board members to be official there as well. So that is a huge, huge accomplishment that took a little while. So we're very excited about that that development, and we have those webinars the third Tuesday, again during fall and spring semesters. This month, however, it's going to be on the fourth Tuesday. So it's going to be on the 27th due to a scheduling change. Summer registration is open, and we've got 4 specific summer classes. I'll be teaching PHP 410. So anybody who has not taken that yet, I will see you either in the summer or in the fall. We've got fundamentals of biorisk management, our capstone for any of you that are approaching the end, and then we always offer an individual study class. 2024 commencement. If you are graduating, we the faculty will go to the May 18th ceremony that is in Hershey. If you're graduating, we would love to have you. It's always really great to be able to meet people and to see you and your family celebrate this. If you are my shout out for commencement, if you are current or former military, please make sure you let us know, especially Rachel Rager, because you will get red, white, and blue honor cords to wear during the ceremony. If you are a member of the Order of the Sword and Shield, make sure that you order your honor cords early because they get bogged down as we get closer. So make sure you take care of that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lengrich to talk about the preparedness summits.
Just very briefly on that, but before I move on, congratulations on getting the IEM chapter. That's been long in the works, and it'll be a great asset to the program. So thanks, Jen, for doing that.
Thank you. It was definitely a team effort. I can't take credit for it.
Good job. Yeah, just as a reminder, there's so there is an annual public health preparedness summit. It is sponsored by CDC. This year it's in Cleveland, March 25th to 28th, just to make sure that you all are aware of that. And either if you're in the Cleveland, Ohio area or could be, then it's a great place to go to get more knowledge, more connections, more with the in crowd for public health preparedness. So it's quite big. That's all.
All right, great. So I am going to stop sharing, and then I am going to give a quick bio for our speaker tonight, and then I will turn it over to him. So Trevor, if you want to start pulling up your slides while I read this, you can go ahead and do that. So our speaker tonight is Dr. Trevor Thrall. He received his PhD in political science from MIT, and until 2022 was associate professor at George Mason University, where he taught undergraduate and graduate courses in international security. For many years, he directed the biodefense graduate program and read comprehensive exams in biodefense, political science, and public policy. He also served on more than 50 dissertation committees. That's 49 plus mine. Trevor is the author of How to Pass Comps and the 12-Week Year for Writers, and is the founder of GetYourWritingDone.com, a site that helps writers to become their most productive selves. So, Trevor, thank you so much for coming tonight and speaking to us on imposter syndrome.
Hey, Jen. So happy to be here. Great to see you again. When we were just talking before we kicked off, I was shocked to realize you've been done for 5 years. I realized, oh my Lord, where's the time going? It's nuts. But I was really happy that you asked me to come speak about this topic. It's as you will all learn shortly, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart for lots of reasons. So I'm excited to dig in here. Let's start with a quick exercise homework. All right, it's quick though, I promise. All right, so grab a piece of paper or open a blank document, and here's your assignment, right? So imagine this: you've just finished your first semester of medical school. The school posts the performances of every student in your class, and lo and behold, you are number 1 after the first semester. And what I want you to do in just exactly 60 seconds is write down very quickly, why are you number 1? And then what is going to happen next semester? All right, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I'm starting my clock right now. Go. I don't have any Jeopardy music. I'm sorry, but I just imagine there's Jeopardy music playing in the background for a minute. Okay, there's 1 minute. Boy, that takes a long time when you're just getting started and you actually want to get going. All right, so you're done with that. We will revisit in a bit. Okay, now it's time for a pop quiz. Just kidding. All right, have you ever found yourself, or do you find yourself sometimes these days thinking any of the following? I don't have anything worth contributing to a class discussion. Or, I'm just not smart enough to do high-level work in this field. Or, man, professors are different kinds of people, like from another planet. I am just not like these people. Or, man, I don't think I'm ever going to know as much as other students seem to know about this topic. Or, if people really knew who I was, they would kick me out of here. Right? If you have felt any of these things, if you're feeling any of these things, join the club, because research suggests that about 70% of Americans will suffer imposter syndrome at some point. And I'm going to go out on a very solid limb and suggest that the number is closer to 100% of graduate students. I dare you to prove me wrong. So let me give you some backstory about backstory part one of why I'm here talking to you about this. So, I arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts to go to grad school at the ripe old age of 21. And when my wife, well, I guess she was my girlfriend then, when we were walking, we got to Cambridge, got our little apartment, and we were just walking around town and getting freaked out. We would look this way and look that way and we'd be like, I think that person's a genius. And you'd see some, nerdy person walk by. Oh, that person's definitely a genius. Holy crap. I was psyched out before I even got on campus. And then when I got to class, it got worse very quickly, because my cohort mates were so far ahead of me, I thought. And you don't even get me started on the professors, who I don't think I looked directly in the eye for about a semester because I was just overwhelmed. I mean, these are people whose books I've been reading for years, and I didn't think I really deserved to be in the same room as them. Much less could I imagine ever doing any writing that looked anything like what they were doing. And so I started to really doubt the entire project. And when I ran into students who'd been there a while, kind of trying to figure out, hey, what's going on? They were so impressive. I couldn't believe the stuff they knew and the stuff they were doing. I could barely follow the sentences they were saying. I was so out of my element, right? Freaked out. And now it got better. It got better slowly. But I have to admit, it probably didn't feel like I fully belonged for about 2.5 years. And then years later, I'm a graduate director at Mason, and I start to see the same process happening with my students. They seem totally overwhelmed, though they won't admit it. But then eventually they turn into these incredibly confident, amazing people. And I think, what happened there? And I realized there's a process to this. There's a process. And not only is there a process, kind of a typical evolution, but there are strategies that you can use to help these things go along. And so it turns out you don't have to just wander around for a few years feeling bad if you're suffering from imposter syndrome. There's actually things you can do about it. And that's a very good thing, because as I can attest, and I know others can too, it doesn't feel very good, right? And worse than that, it can actually keep you from achieving your professional goals if you don't get a handle on it. And so, that's really my motivation tonight, is to help anyone who's dealing with that get a hold of it. And so today's goals are pretty straightforward, right? First, let's just define it, because frankly, a lot of people talk like it's obvious what that is, but it's actually not as obvious, I don't think, for people who are suffering it sometimes. And the second thing I want to do is diffuse any negative associations you might have with it. I think, one of the reasons people don't like admitting they have something is because they don't like what that label suggests. Maybe it has negative connotations. I'm here to tell you it's normal. We all get it. It's like chicken pox. It's not your fault. It happens. And then last, and certainly not least, I want to give you some strategies to manage and overcome imposter syndrome because, it's really important. All right. So let's start with the basics. Let's define imposter syndrome, right? The name is pretty descriptive. It's basically a feeling, right? And let me stop right actually before I even start. And let me just say this. I have a PhD in political science. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I cannot diagnose imposter syndrome. What I'm sharing with you tonight are my own experiences and understanding of the research that I have consumed on this. I'm not an expert, medically speaking. And if anything we talk about tonight sort of is really upsetting or scary, please go talk to somebody who is a professional. That would be a good idea. All right. That warning aside, right? Imposter syndrome is a feeling that you are not as competent as other people might think you are, right? You're a fraud, that you don't belong in a certain situation because you're not like the other people there. You're not as qualified to be there as others, or that you are masquerading as someone you are not, right? And again, these are extremely common feelings. Again, 70% is what the surveys suggest. I haven't actually seen the question wording of this, whatever survey this is. This survey gets referenced all the time. I haven't looked at the wording. I have to believe it's higher than that in reality. Same kind of research suggests that 25 or 30% of Americans feel it on a regular basis. What does regular basis mean? Does it mean like sort of all the time I feel like this, or on occasion I feel like this? I can't tell you specifically. But again, what I can tell you is everyone I know who I have talked about this topic with in any depth has admitted that they've had it. So to me, it's 100% of people in my own sort of world, which includes, academics, professionals of various kinds, basically anyone who's been to college, I would say, is that I have ever talked to about this has had it. So it's a feeling, right? And so, as I used to, talk to my Mason grad students, if you're a policy person and you're trying to fix a policy problem, you want to know where the off button to this problem is. The first thing you have to figure out is where's the on button, right? If we want to find the off button, we need to figure out what the on button is. And that's actually kind of an interesting journey because, as an academic, I started thinking about imposter syndrome at some point, and I started trying to figure out why it happens. And no, there's no good single answer to this question. But I'll say this, I think at the broadest level, it's because, humans are social animals, and we are, we're all, genetically wired to want to fit in, to want to belong to a group, and want to feel safe by sort of following the group norms, right? So anytime we find ourselves in a position where we're doubting whether we're fitting into those things is a potential problem for us from an imposter syndrome standpoint. But then it turns out that one of the reasons it's so common, not only are we all social animals, but we all have parents. And one of the things that you read about in the literature when you read a little bit about imposter syndrome is that a common thread of discussion of people who study this is that folks who have parents who, out of good intentions, undoubtedly, put pressure and expectations on you about your performance, that's often closely linked to people who feel imposter syndrome. So if people expected you to do well in school, expected you to do well at sports or music or whatever it might be, right, where there's pressure on you to live up to those norms or those expectations of the people who matter, who are around you, right? So, basically, that's sort of like saying, why do humans be human? It's because we all exist and are social creatures. That's why you get imposter syndrome. So in other words, there's really no escape for this. That's what I'm saying. That's the bad news. But we can be a little more specific about when it happens. It's a little bit like war. We're always going to have it with us. The real interesting question is, when is it going to happen? And so the triggers for imposter syndrome are a little bit more interesting, I think, to think about. But they're not really a huge secret either when you think about it. When are you going to feel like an imposter? It's when you're doing new things, right? Things that you're not comfortable doing. So when you inhabit a new role, right? When you go from something you've done for a long time and you're comfortable with to all of a sudden you're in a new role and you're not comfortable, it's very easy to feel like I'm not this person yet. I don't know how to do this. And, just tell a story on my kids. A couple of my kids in particular, always were terrified at moving up a grade in elementary school. They're just like, but I don't know how to be a third grader. It's terrifying. I'd be like, dude, you just crushed second grade, man. You got everything you need to be a third grader. But they didn't feel it. They didn't feel it at first because they'd never been a third grader. They knew what third graders were like. They knew they were not a third grader. Took them a while to feel comfortable being a third grader. So it's a new role, right? New groups and new settings. If you've ever joined a new team or a new club, sometimes you walk around going, I don't know what I'm doing. Who am I? I don't really fit in here. I'm not one of them. Then you get used to it, and then you are. Another trigger is a more challenging situation than the one you've been in. And so I think, moving up grade levels is actually kind of one of those things. If you take a more challenging job or something like that, where there's more pressure than there was before, sometimes you're not sure that you're up for it. You can feel like you're an imposter for thinking you could do that kind of a job, right? Sometimes people get a promotion or something like that. Another trigger is competitive situations. So, again, when there's a lot of pressure and expectation to perform at a level, you start worrying other people are going to be able to hit the bar. I'm not, something like that. And then, for example, one of the things I think is probably counterintuitive to young people who are thinking about this, who maybe feel, these kind of insecurities and anxieties, is, believe it or not, one of the groups who suffers from imposter syndrome most keenly are CEOs. CEOs report constant imposter syndrome because think about what they're doing. Like they get tapped to be the most important person in an organization. And you'd have to be a pretty immodest person to walk around and say, hey, there's 1,000 people in this organization, but I'm the most important person. Like that's terrifying, right? I mean, who the heck am I to be the most important person in any group of 1,000 people? That's ridiculous, right? No one feels like that. So every time a CEO launches a big new project that might fail or moves from company one to company two, right? They feel it all the time. So these new roles, high pressure, a lot of expectations. But then, of course, graduate school is one of these, right? It's tailor-made. It has like all these kind of elements to it, if you think about it, right? You may never have been a graduate student before. It feels competitive because there's grades involved and you sort of want to be good at what you're doing. It matters a lot. Your parents care, maybe your spouse or your partner cares, whatever. And like I said, when I got to grad school, my story is exactly the same as every other grad student's. You're amazed by the people around you. You think they're incredible. You can't really imagine getting to the point where, advanced graduate students have gotten, much less the professors. And you sort of start thinking, what am I doing here? Right. I remember a friend, my wife was going to the Kennedy School while I was going to MIT, and she had a friend, and they were in a class together, and they had weekly papers that just got check plus, check minus, right? And he said, I guess my new name is just check minus, Mr. Check Minus. That's me. And for like a year, he didn't think he was any better than a check minus anymore because he just kept getting the check minus. Didn't believe he belonged, and that was just a little sign that he didn't. Graduate school is a kind of a brutal situation, I think, from an imposter syndrome standpoint. So, but here's the funny thing, right? You'd think if it's so common that we would all understand it pretty well. Like, everyone knows what it's like to get the flu. Everyone knows what it's like to go to the first day of school. If you start talking about that very common experience with people, they'll go, oh, yeah, sure, yeah, I hated that. That was terrible. But it's not the case with imposter syndrome. You don't just roll around sharing imposter syndrome stories with people. People don't talk about it. And I'm going to guess, it's very possible that some of the people on this Zoom have never heard the phrase before. And if they'd heard the phrase, weren't really sure what it meant. And even if they were kind of maybe thought they knew what it meant, didn't actually have a clue of whether they had been feeling those feelings yet before or not, because we don't have a common dialogue about this. And so one of the things that I want to do is I want to talk about what the signs of imposter syndrome are, because for me, I know that I suffered all through graduate school with these feelings, having exactly zero idea what this was. I did not know this was a thing. I didn't know other people suffered from it. I didn't know it had a name. And in fact, I'm not sure when the name got popular. It might have been slightly after that. I don't know. But anyway, so maybe they hadn't even given it a name yet when I was having it. I don't know. But that did not help at all. So what I want to do now is talk about some of the sort of the flags that if you're seeing these things in yourself or maybe someone else, these are signs that imposter syndrome may be at work. So now the first of these is something I will call externalizing success. So let's go back to our medical school scenario, if you will. Pardon me while I go to my little notes. Okay, so this scenario, this is a funny, long story. I first encountered this scenario as a sophomore in high school when I took a psychology class with Mrs. Smoller, who, if you're out there, Mrs. Smoller, thank you, great class. So she had us do this scenario. And of course, you know how it is in class. You never have any idea what your evil trick your professor is trying to play on you when they do these things. So you just naively write down whatever you're thinking at the time. And then she calls us back together and starts explaining, well, here's what it all means. And you're sort of horrified, right? Well, I won't ask anyone to share, but sort of two ways you could answer the first question, why are you number one, right? And the first way is to say, look, I'm really smart. I study very hard. I take it seriously. I have some good strategies for studying. And so, woo, number one. And next semester, I have a pretty good chance of being number one again, because obviously I did it this time, right? Now, you may say that's just an arrogant, confident person. Sounds like a doctor to me. But what I want to draw your attention to there is that the sources of success in that person's mind are internal, right? I caused the success. The other way people commonly answered this question, however, and I still remember these from the class discussion, it was a fluke. They must have calculated the grades wrong. I don't know, maybe people just weren't taking it very seriously. I'm so nervous about school. I panic. And so I spend too much time. So, and it probably won't happen again. I'm not really that good. Right. And so those are signs of externalizing success. Success is happening for fluky reasons that are not in my control. I did not have anything to do with them. If you have a tendency to externalize success in your own life, or you're seeing someone else do it, that could be a sense or a sign that this person has some imposter syndrome. Why? Because if you thought you belonged in medical school because you were smart and capable of doing the work at a high level, you would probably share some internal signs or sources of success. But if you aren't feeling confident that you belong, that you have control over your actions and so on and so forth, you're going to likely point outside yourself to these things, right? And so now I speak here as a Midwesterner. I'm sure many of you are Midwesterners. I'm from Michigan, so modesty is part of our DNA. But I think you get sort of the point there, that it's one thing to sort of demur and try not to be bragging, but if you're writing a private note to yourself about why you succeeded and you don't credit yourself, that's a different sign, right? Okay, second sign is something, for lack of a technical term, I will call agonizing over your performance. Have you ever beaten yourself up for an A-? If you have, this is, it doesn't mean you're struggling at that very moment with imposter syndrome, because in fact, you may be just pissed that you missed a question and it's something you're very good at and you're mad at yourself. That's fine. But I'll just say, I know people in their 60s, 70s, and even one person who is in their 80s, who shall not be named, who can still spend many minutes getting a dark mood about grades they got in junior high, right? Like still upset, still mad, still, bumming about. And why? Because they're sure if people just start following the trail of that bad grade I got in 7th grade, they're going to unravel my whole bullshit. Pardon my French. Right. And all of a sudden they're going to see the gaping chasm in my CV that is all the fraud that I have papered over, all my weaknesses. And those bad performances are the cracks in my armor. Right. And so agonizing over performance. Right. And I don't mean, I'm sad I failed. That's fine. I mean, outsized responses to not very big differences in performance, right? A third one is hypersensitivity to feedback. This is somewhat related, right? These things are all related. I think you can sort of tell, but hypersensitivity to feedback, right? If you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to give you constructive criticism about something and you just shut them down, you're like, that's ridiculous. No, stop. So hypersensitive, for example, that they won't let anyone read their stuff because they don't want any feedback, right? That's another sign that someone does not feel comfortable that getting criticism won't be okay, because it may reveal that they're a fraud, they're an imposter, they're not what they say they are or want to be, whatever, right? Another one, and again, I sort of include this because of my Midwestern sensitivities, but over modesty. And what I mean here is like the weird over modesty, and it is related to this externalizing success thing. But have you ever been in a group discussion where someone will say, well, this is probably wrong, but, or this is probably a terrible idea, but, or you're much smarter than I am about this, but I don't, and so not just modest, but like sort of weirdly overly modest, right? And again, I'm a Midwesterner. Sometimes that becomes a competitive battle to be modest, but again, I'm especially if you're looking at yourself and you're realizing you have sort of a tendency to roll that way sometimes, and you might ask yourself, why do I do that, right? And it may be because you're not comfortable that it's okay, whatever it is you're actually saying, right? You don't feel comfortable just saying whatever it is and letting other people decide. You have to first say it's bad instead, right? So that could be another sign. And then finally, another sign that I'll then talk about, again, a story about myself here, is avoidance behavior. So if your imposter syndrome is strong enough, you may stop doing things that you normally would want to do or should do because you're so afraid of being exposed. So story again time. So when I was finishing my dissertation, I was a visiting assistant professor and teaching for the first time, having a good time, finally making some money, which was great. And trying to finish. And my dissertation, I had written a conference paper. One of the things you're supposed to do. And I was going to Chicago to the American Political Science Association conference to present it in the fall. And, it's the standard monster conference, 10,000 people, tons of panels, and everyone goes and gives a talk and goes to lots of terrible panels and small talk, stuff like that. And so I had this paper written, and, you wait and find out, you get the little program guide to see who's on your panel. And I come to learn that the discussant on my panel is a big dog, like #1 in the subfield in which I had written my paper, which was great. I was very excited because I'd read all this person's stuff, loved it. I even used one of his textbooks in one of my classes. Like, that's how big dog, right? And I said, well, this is fantastic, because if he's on the panel, that means people are actually going to show up because you know how this is. You go to a big hotel, 10,000 people, and somehow there's only 2 people at your panel. This is the norm, because there's like 63 panels at the same time. So I was like, no, I got big dog. We're gonna have 100 people in the room. Well, you see where this is going, right? Oh my God, there's gonna be 100 people in the room. Oh my God, the big dog is gonna read my paper and rip it to shreds in front of a huge crowd of people. I started becoming less confident all of a sudden. So I'm practicing, I'm presenting, I'm practicing. But as the day gets closer and closer, I'm not feeling great. We get to Chicago, we're staying in a little motel nearby because it's too cheap to stay in the hotel. And I'm really starting to sweat. I'm sweating bullets. And I finally said, you know what? I'm not going. I'm not doing it. I cannot present this paper in front of these people. And so I did something that to this day, I have never heard a fellow political scientist tell me they have done. I skipped the panel. I was like, nope, I'm not doing it. I felt terrible, of course. I felt like an idiot. But at the same time, I was very relieved because I had the worst case of imposter syndrome going right that minute that you could possibly believe. I thought the paper was garbage. I thought I was garbage. I was starting to rethink my entire life plans. It was not good. So then again, back to my Midwestern roots, I started feeling rude for having skipped the panel. So I was like, oh, darn it, I got to go talk to this guy. So I found him at a cocktail party later that day. I was like, oh, I made up some stupid story. Oh, I got the time wrong, whatever. And he's like, oh, it's too bad, man. I really want to talk about your paper. Yeah. I think you had a, issue here or there, but I really liked it. You just clean this up. This could be really good. I was like, oh my Lord, what have I done? Well, it was a really big lesson for me because I learned that imposter syndrome is a real big deal. Number one, but number two, I realized it's just feelings, right? And my feelings are often wrong. Like they're not real. They're not the same as what's really happening. And I realized I need to figure out a way to not let that happen again, because otherwise I'm never going to be able to go to a conference, right? And so that was kind of when it clicked for me that I need to figure out some strategies to deal with imposter syndrome. So avoidance behavior is a really, if you're dealing with that, you've got to deal with imposter syndrome. Now I can tell a story about someone else that's not me. I knew a postdoc a few years ago, and she was brilliant and very accomplished, and had just finished her PhD and was doing her first gig, sort of, I guess you would say, in the real world. And she was supposed to present at a conference, and she started getting so upset about the prospects of doing so that she shared with me that she was planning not to go. And I was like, man, I don't tell this story in public. I got to tell her this story. I got to tell her my story. I got to tell her to go. I got to tell her to buck up here and fight the imposter syndrome. So I sat her down in her office and I talked. I said, look, you think I'm like all successful and stuff, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. I want to be like you, Yeah. I'm so like, don't be making me like this, like do better, because here's what happened to me. And it was okay. You live. She didn't go. And then she dropped out of her postdoc because she got so wound up about the problem of feeling okay and feeling like she was a real person in this setting that she just couldn't handle it, and she dropped out. And so avoidance behavior is not only a very good sign of imposter syndrome, but it's a sign that you're really struggling with it. And so if you're finding that you're starting to have avoidance behavior in your own schooling, career, whatever, it's time to sit down, I think, and think about it. And so I again, personal experience, right? All right. So how to deal with these things, right? If I ended the talk here, that'd be a real downer. So let's press on. Okay. I kind of already talked about these. I don't want to end here either, but right. So mental health struggles, right? It causes stress, anxiety, and depression. And again, not to bum people out, but if you look at the numbers of grad students who are suffer from anxiety and depression, it's about like this. It's really important to deal with these issues, not only to get through school, but to be happy in your life. So you don't want to let imposter syndrome or any other kind of source of anxiety or depression linger any longer than necessary. But at the same time, you're also going to get less out of grad school, right? If you're not engaging fully because you're worried, if you're not engaging in class discussion because you don't think you have stuff to offer, if you're afraid to go talk to a professor because you don't think you belong in their office, if you don't, right, go to conferences because you're afraid to present in public, right, you're not going to get what you need out of grad school. You're going to like it last too. It's not going to be any fun. It's going to be like, dragging yourself over hot coals or rusty nails or something like that. And then again, like the postdoc story I told, I've seen people drop out of programs, leave postdocs and stuff like this because this gets too exhausting, right? And so, the biggest risk is really not pursuing your own dreams. So what do we do about it? Okay, glad you asked. All right, the first thing, and I hope we've kind of gotten you partway to this strategy already just through the conversation so far. The first thing is just to expect that it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen. Don't freak out, right? It's like getting the chicken pox or the flu. You're going to get it. It happens to all of us. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you did something wrong. It doesn't mean you're going to have a terrible life or you can't do this or that. It's just going to happen, right? It's going to go away over time. Even if you don't try really hard, most of the time, it goes away over time. So don't let it freak you out. I'll tell a story on my dad here. So my dad, also a professor, but a doctor. I like to say, not really a professor, more of a doctor. But he always, had a great career, retired now, but used to throw up before every public speech in front of a conference every time. every single time. And I was like, Dad, why do you do this job? What are you talking about? It's like, it happens. Whatever. I throw up and I go on. I was like, okay, that's a pretty good lesson. It took me a while to internalize that fully, but now I get it, right? You just, first of all, don't freak out if you feel it, right? Don't let that rock you. It's going to happen. It's probably going to happen more than once in your life, right? Grad school's unfortunately not the last time, but it's okay. Don't freak out, right? The second piece of advice, the more proactive piece of advice, number one, is do the work. So one of the reasons, especially for grad students, that we feel like imposters is that we don't have a long track record of acting like the person we want to be. You guys want to be public health professionals of varying stripes, but for many of you, I'm guessing, you haven't been doing that yet, right? And I'm going to guess if we separated you into two groups, people who are like straight out of school versus people who've been working in the public health sector for a while, and we asked you about your feelings of imposter syndrome relative to class in the program, it would be a lot worse for people who are coming right out of school because you haven't done the work yet. You haven't done the things that public health professionals do. And so a very simple solution to speed up the process of overcoming imposter syndrome is to do that work. And so you ask, well, what does a public health professional do? Right? Well, you write papers, you go to conferences, you do whatever public health professionals do those things, right? Get an internship, get a job, part-time job, doing those things, right? Grad school itself is part of the process of doing the work, right? And I guarantee you, imposter syndrome does not live for very long once you prove to your lizard brain by doing the work that you're actually doing the work, right? It doesn't survive a good, harsh reality check very well. So doing the work is number one. Very closely related is engage the community. And Jen, your opening slide couldn't have been better because right when I started the conversation about where does imposter syndrome come from, I talked about the fact that it's really sort of an identity issue, right? It's a socialization issue. We feel like imposters because we don't feel like one of the group that we want to feel one of. Well, how do you get comfortable in a group? You engage with it, right? We've all been to a new school, to a new church, to a new team, to a new whatever it might be, and the only recipe is repeated interactions with those people. And so, put on your socks the same way they do. Go to the same conferences they go to the webinars, go talk to your professors, go to brown bags, talk to other friends about your papers, right? Engage the community. And pretty soon when someone asks you, who are you? You'll be like, I'm a public health professional. And you'll be like, where'd that come from? And you won't even know because you've just socialized yourself to the point where, of course, that's who you are. That's what you do. What is it's someone who does public health. What do you do all day? Well, I do public health. Well, that's what you are. You won't feel like an imposter anymore. So doing the work, engaging the community, be who you want to be, right? It sounds a little simple, but it's actually something you need to do to make it happen. A fourth thing is you need to talk about it publicly. Starting to sound like a 12-step program. That's not it, but no making amends. But it does help to talk about it publicly, right? That's what I'm doing right now. Again, this is a hard one for a lot of people because if I think, generally about what kind of folks you guys are as students, you're ambitious, you're high achieving, you're people who have probably gotten a lot of A's, been told you're very smart people, and you're probably not the kind of people who ever want to admit weakness in public. That is not your jam, right? And I know from, spending most of my adult professional life with professors, they don't even like saying they don't know something, much less being wrong, much less showing weakness of any sort in public. So you will never hear a professor say, never, I suffer from imposter syndrome, ever. That does not help people because it gets exhausting to carry that stuff around, right? Exhausting. Like any kind of mental health struggle that you can't tell people about, it's exhausting. But what helps is talking about it, not just with a therapist, which would also help, definitely, but talk about it in public. And that does a few things, right? Telling a cohort mate, a friend in your class, you might be scared at first because you're being vulnerable. Yes, you are being vulnerable, but guess what's going to happen? They're going to go, me too. And all of a sudden you're not going to be alone. It's going to get normalized. You'll be like, wow, yeah, that sucks. And you're going to get support. And if they laugh at you, well, they've saved you time and money figuring out that they're not the right person to hang out with, right? So thanks for this time saving. But the other thing that's kind of interesting, I'll tell one more story on myself here. When you share your vulnerabilities, is that people actually like you better. Like, people think that showing weakness means people somehow won't like you. Maybe they'll be less impressed with me. Well, guess what? You can impress people, but if you impress them, they're probably not going to like you very much, right? So, story about that for me. Many years ago, I'm working in an organization, and one of my very good friends retired. So I gave a little speech. I got a little worked up, cried. I maybe cried. It's been said I cried, possibly. Got a little choked up, maybe a lot choked up. I don't know. He's a really good guy. And afterwards, so the whole organization was there. So I did this in front of literally all 26 people who worked in this place. It was slightly embarrassing, but I didn't care. He's my friend. So then afterwards, a woman walked up to me who of course, I knew there's only 25 other people in the organization, but we didn't work in the same city even. She worked in a different office. So we'd known each other for a couple of years, but we had like exchanged probably 50 words. She comes up to me and goes, "Wow, your talk really surprised me. I kind of always thought you were just one of those polished professional assholes." She literally said that to me. Like 5 minutes after she sees me crying in public, she said that to me. But the funny thing was, she loved me then. She was so friendly. Like, I made it sound like she was being mean. No. It was actually entirely she was like my best friend from then on. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, you don't know me. How did you have any opinion about me? But here's the thing. I was the only person in the organization with a PhD. I had a title that made it kind of clear I was a little different from other people. She didn't. She and I were not the same kind of person. So she put me on a different sort of the thing and said, he's kind of one of those jerks. But when I shared a vulnerability, she's like, oh, I like him. He's a good person. I can relate to that. And so, long story short, right? You will be afraid to be vulnerable with other people. You don't have to shout it out to the whole classroom if you don't want, that's fine. But telling a friend, telling a small group, hey man, I feel lost doing this paper. Are we supposed to know how to do this yet? Everyone's going to go, that's what I was thinking. I guarantee it. And they're not going to hate you or think you're stupid for saying that. They're going to be like, I'm glad someone said it. And man, you're a good person. I can relate to you, right? I promise this is true. Okay. A fifth strategy, teaching what you know. This one is very useful, I think, because, and the example I will give to explain this is, did you ever move to a new town? Right? Like, for example, for school or something like that. And you feel like a fish out of water for a while. You're like, I don't know my way around. Definitely not from here. You feeling like an imposter. Like, I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I look around like, I don't know where to buy milk. I feel like an imposter here. And then your parents come to town 6 months later and you show them around. And by the end of the weekend, you're like, I'm a local. I know this place. What did you do? What happened? Well, you taught someone else who knew even less than you. And by doing that, you convinced yourself you actually know kind of a lot about this topic. Well, that's exactly what can happen for you with imposter syndrome, with whatever topic you're feeling stressed about. If you find someone who knows less than you about it, which is going to be a lot of people, and you teach them, whether it could be high school students, it could be junior high students, it could be a college class, you could help TA, you could give a talk to somebody. But I tell you, 5-10 minutes when you start to see people nod and go, well, that's interesting, right? You'll be like, hey, wait a minute. I must not be an imposter. I have some things to say and people are getting something from what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be formal, it can be informal, but it really, really does help a lot. Okay. And then the last one is don't compare. Comparing is bad. Comparing is bad for lots of reasons. We won't go into them there. It's a whole nother talk, but specifically, I want to say the phrase that you will probably hear a lot in your life, don't compare your insides with other people's outsides, which is a phrase I heard a long time ago before Instagram even existed, but I would call that the Instagram rule. You would not judge how happy and successful a person is from their Instagram photos, would you? Well, I mean, you do, but you shouldn't, and you know that, right? That's fake. Well, it's actually still true in person, in an organization, in school, or whatever, for the reasons I said before. People don't walk around sharing how hard life is. People don't put a paper down on their professor's desk and make it clear how much they struggled or doubt how good it is. No, people don't tend to share that. And in competitive situations, sometimes people are even a little bit jerky about it, right? So it's easy if you're feeling insecure or like an imposter to assume that that's just reality. Other people are better, smarter, have no struggles. But you feel the reality of you, which is this dark, oh my God, it was so hard. But guess what? That's a false comparison. It's not true. They're struggling too. They're just not showing, right? Think of it like Instagram. What you're seeing is like Instagram. The reality, not so much, right? And I think more generally, it can help to prevent or ameliorate or dampen imposter syndrome feelings if in general you can adopt a positive sum view of the world rather than a zero sum view of the world, right? A zero sum view of the world in kind of a professional or a school setting is there can only be one smart student. If someone is smart, then I have to be the dumb one. But that's false. It's false in every regard in your life. Someone else can write an A paper and you can write an A paper. Someone else can have a great career and you can have a great career. It's not zero sum. Everybody can do great. So just because someone else is doing great should not be a trigger for your imposter syndrome. And this is a lifetime struggle. I'm not suggesting this is easy to do. It is not easy to do. But again, what I'm suggesting is that we need to be intentional. All these strategies are sort of very broad commandments. They're not really the recipe for how you're going to do that. You're still going to need to figure out the right way for you to do these strategies. So when I suggest that comparing is kind of can be a problem with imposter syndrome, I can't tell you exactly how to stop the Instagram whirl. Take it off your phone, I suppose. But I think you get what I'm saying. All right, wrap it up. And happy to take questions if there are. But just leave with a few thoughts, right? So managing imposter syndrome is definitely a lifetime project. I hate to report. So, for all the reasons that we talked about, the different triggers, those things can happen throughout your life. There's no reason to think you get to stop ever having to worry about it. However, you can develop skills and strategies to deal with it so that when you do encounter it again, it doesn't have to knock you off your stride so much. Because once you know it's going to happen, every time you do a new thing, you can be ready for it. You can prepare ahead of time. You can think about strategies. You don't have to let it, really knock you off kilter. And finally, just sort of a reminder, look, it's not going to stop you from reaching your goals. Don't freak out. Don't act like just because you're suffering from imposter syndrome that this is somehow a sign you're not going to get what you need to get or want to get. You absolutely. So that's what I got. Questions, comments, thoughts from the gallery?
So thank you so much for that. I'll watch the chat if anybody wants to type a question. You can also raise your hand if you've got one. One thing I will say about the don't compare, it's great to have people that you look up to. And when I joined the Coast Guard, I did this. I was there. I had been there for like 2 months. I was working with some amazing people, and I'm like, oh my God, I have done nothing with my life. And I had to take a step back, and I'm like, wait a second, I've been here for 2 months. The people that I'm looking up to have been here for like 18 years. I'm not going to have the same resume that they do. What I need to do is take a step back, look at where they are and how they got there, not compare myself to them right now, because that's never going to happen.
100%.
And saying that professors will never admit to this, I will break your stigma. One great thing that I always think about with this topic is I have this guy who was my is still my PhD study buddy. I think we exchanged a million copies of each of our dissertations. Keith, Trevor. He's still like, I call him my academic big brother. And he's a retired FBI guy. And one day I saw this posting on LinkedIn and I sent it to him with no text, no nothing. I just screenshotted it and sent it to him. And he sends me a text back saying, oh, that looks great. Are you going to apply? And I texted him back and I said, no, like that was for you. And he said, why would you send that to me? You're the one with all of the things that they are looking for. I don't have any of these. And I was like, oh my God, he's right. Me applying for that position, I didn't end up actually applying for it, but me applying for it never crossed my mind. I thought of him immediately. I sent it to him and didn't even think about the fact that I actually could be in the running for this job. So that was a huge eye opener, and it wasn't even anything that, I expected. So it was
Yeah,
that
interesting.
that's always something that I think of when I when we talk about this
Yep.
topic.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. That's a good example. How can a
All right.
graduate program? That's a darn good question. And I think, a lot of programs. So I was going to mention this. I got off track there, but online programs have different problems from in-person programs for sure on this score, because you have to be a lot more intentional, I think, to bring people together in order to try to, prevent some of this stuff from happening. But I think, Jen, just looking at your slides, like, you guys seem very proactive. I think these kind of webinars are great. One thing I will say, not criticizing, but because I have this all the time when I teach online, is having small group venues where people turn on their cameras is important, because it's great to hear from the sages on the stage, but that's not community. So community is when people are talking to each other. So I think opportunities to allow people to really talk to each other is really important. And I don't know which ones of those you guys have, but for me, I know, for example, one of um, the best examples of the sharing in public and kind of why grad programs how they can be useful is, so at MIT, we had to do a dissertation proposal defense in public before you could be approved to go on to write it was public. And unfortunately, it was like bread and circus. It was a blood sport. These things drew crowds because our professors were so mean. I mean, it was awful. And so my cohort quickly came up with the phrase "blood on the floor" to describe how these things had gone. Well, how much blood on the floor was there? Because these poor students would get eviscerated. And sometimes the professors would eviscerate each other too. But what was interesting is, so we always had lunch every day, our cohort. And so we would come and just talk about the day. And everyone was terrified of these things. And we were terrified for the 2 years before any of us got there. But I don't remember how it came up that someone admitted that the blood on the floor was terrifying, and that we were all nodding. Yes, that is terrifying. I don't look forward to this. But just saying that out loud, all of us, like, it just made it less terrifying, because everyone was scared. Everyone felt like they weren't ready. Everyone was worried what would happen. And by the time someone did then from our cohort go through it the first time, it was fine, because did they get beat up a little bit? But none of us took it that seriously anymore, because it didn't actually kill anyone, just made their proposals better in the long run. Momentary unpleasantness. But the fact that you had a group of people who were in it together, it made it all a difference, So I think one of the key things about imposter syndrome is what an isolating experience it is, right? And any experience, I mean, the simple answer is any experiences you can design that bring people together out of their own shells to see the truth of the situations that everyone shares in common. I think those are the things that really help grad students a lot. So, for me, like, brown bags were great because they were in person. So I got to sit and meet people and talk to people giving talks. That was super helpful. Yeah. So your dissertation was you're welcome, Jim. Yeah. No. We were very friendly, I thought.
You were. It was very painless.
Yeah.
So JD said that self-promotion is almost impossible when you're thinking you're impersonating your positions. So
Yeah.
do you have any good advice about how you can, like, do that when you are kind of in that position?
Oh boy. How do you market yourself when you're afraid to put yourself in? That's a tough one, man. I mean, JD, do you want to say something about like what you mean a little more? Like, what kind of challenge are you thinking of specifically there?
Well, just recently I went to the APHA, the Public Health Association conference in Atlanta, and there was one committee, and ended up sitting next to a fellow Penn Stater, and I forget what it was on, and he's like, "Don't you have something to say?" I was like, "I've got nothing to add to this. I don't know what they could take from me." He's like, "What are you talking about? I sat in on your capstone, and
Right.
you said this and this, and this is all relevant." And it didn't dawn on me. I was just
Yeah.
kept my mouth shut. But
Mhm.
yeah,
Right.
it's
No,
hard
no.
to self promote when you're.
Right. So, one of the reasons that, um, you know, brown bags, webinars like this are so important is because you need to practice putting yourself out in low cost situations, right? Going to present for the first time you ever present in public, doing it in front of hundreds of people at the APHA, not probably a good plan, probably a very bad idea. So how do you make that less scary? Well, you present lots of times to littler groups and then a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And I think there are a lot of ways to take the scariness level of anything you might be doing in your field down a few notches. So for example, presenting a paper can be less scary if you have a co-author, right? So a lot of us are terrified to do anything alone, but it becomes a lot easier if we have a buddy, right? Some people hate playing individual sports because it's all the stress is on you, but put them in a team sports situation and they're fine. Like literally going through the exact same motions, all fine because I have a team, right? And I think that's a great way to be able to sit on the panel even, but not feel like it's all on you, right? Because you got, and then right, that helps. And then maybe down the road, you don't need to do it yourself, you know? So Laura, you got a question.
Yeah, so my question has to do with, I guess I have talked to a lot of mentors about imposter syndrome, and it kind of boggles my mind when they're like, "Oh yeah, I still have that. I have imposter syndrome too." So I guess my question is there hope? Is it always just gonna feel like this? I'm going to get to whatever my peak is or whatever I feel like the best I can be is, and I'm still going to feel like I'm impersonating someone and not actually like doing the things.
Nah, you're gonna be fine. And here's the thing is that there's in the realm of psychology, and again, I'm not a psychologist, but as a social scientist who has struggled with theory for a long time, right? Talking about imposter syndrome is the lines get blurred between imposter syndrome and fear, like just plain old fear, like or anxiety, or like when is one and when is it actually the other? Is like, let's put that aside for a moment, right? Let's not worry about what you call it exactly. But in general, I find for me that the costs and threats of imposter syndrome are much lower than they were when I was 20, right? Because the whole world was new to me when I was 20. When I was your age, everything was new. I was terrified all the time. This is the first time I've ever done that. First time ever, I mean, it's the first time I've even been in this state, much less given a talk in this state. Like, I haven't flown an airplane, but like, you're doing all this new stuff. It's crazy. So you have a lot of anxiety, not just imposter syndrome, but you have a lot of anxiety at the same time about all this stuff. All that's going to fade as you get used to this stuff, and it all gets easier, right? And now, my point about the strategies is it'll get easier faster, more reliably if you are intentional about, and Gene raises a great point in the chat, right? I talk all the time. You don't want to get me started on mindset stuff because I big believer in mindset, but absolutely, Gene's right. Thinking about like adopting a growth mindset, embracing resilience, and trying to make sure that you are ready for engaging battle when you're doing it, right? Also, I think it's important to be focused on things that you are actually feel strong about, right? So for example, I have strengths and I have weaknesses. If you said I have to go make a career out of the places I feel weak, I don't think I would get over imposter syndrome. That would suck, right? Because I would never feel completely like I belonged there, because I wouldn't. That would be a terrible place for me. But allow me to play in the fields where I feel comfortable, and eventually imposter syndrome, I mean, it might not ever go away. Like if you just tapped me on the head and gave me some crazy job in my field, I would still feel it. But I would get over it a lot faster because I know it. I know how I respond to it. I know it's not real. I mean, I know it's temporary. I know my strategies. I would work the process and I'd get over it. So yes, there is hope. There is absolutely hope, right? I mean, it's just like saying you're going to be sad in the future sometimes too, but that's okay. It doesn't mean life isn't good and doesn't get better.
I was just gonna say something along those lines. You almost took the words right out of my mouth. Like if you can hone in on something. I was in July, I'm a Coast Guard reservist for any of you who don't know. And I'm stationed at Joint Staff South. And I work with a bunch of special operations guys. So I was down in Tampa with my Navy SEAL captain. I'm at Special Operations Command, walking around with a Navy SEAL. I'm a Coast Guard 04. Like, this is not my world at all. So I totally borrowed his street cred, not gonna lie. And when we were in the meetings that we were in, we got there early because we were there for a countering weapons of mass destruction conference, which, thanks to my biodefense degree, I was comfortable talking in. But when we were getting things ready for all of the principles that were going to be in, I was really good at helping prepare the information into an understandable format. Like, sure, the Navy SEALs that were sitting on both sides of me were really great at, like, killing people and interdicting weapons and things like that. I'm not doing that. Like, they got that. But when it came to the task at hand, I was good at that. I could make a contribution there. So by the time all those 4 stars came in the room and all those people from the Pentagon, those slides were ready to go. And I was able to play a strong role in that, which I was really comfortable with. So, I mean, if you were talking to me about, how to survive Hell Week, not my thing. I don't even belong in the building where that room is. But when it came to those slides, that
Yep.
was a different story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, playing to your strengths, right? I mean, I think we all have different roles that we inhabit in any group, team, community, whatever, and we can't be equally comfortable in any of those roles, but we can find our strengths and the roles that suit us, and that is probably a good strategy to add to my list of. I don't want to have too many strategies, but I should probably add that one. I think playing to your strengths or from your strengths, your comfort spot is a good idea. I trying to remember who. Yeah, therapist at one point I was talking to was like, you shouldn't spend very long out of your comfort zone. Like a lot of people, oh, personal growth doesn't happen unless you're outside your comfort zone. But mental health problems is what happens when you spend too long out of your comfort zone, right? You need to spend a lot of time in your comfort zone because there's a reason it's called your comfort zone. That's where you operate most confidently, competently, and so on. And yes, you can stretch for, sort of focused intervals to do various things that are important to you, but you got to recharge the battery and keep yourself sane. So, I think that's a good idea. Start from your strength.
We just got a thank you in the chat. Are there any other questions? Any other hand raised? Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for coming. She had to jump off. And from a graduate student perspective, obviously one strategy can always be reach out to us. We are here. I have had a number of students that have asked me about preparing for professional jobs, have just wanted to vent when they didn't think that they belong
Absolutely.
there. So that's why
Absolutely.
we're here.
Are we mostly master's students in this setting right now, or are we a mix?
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, little mix. Well, so at Mason, of course, we always had masters and PhD students in the same class, and just to your point exactly, I had a foundations of security studies class. We read one book a week, the classics of security studies, and I had 3
It's a
PhD
good class.
students. It's a good class. So I had 3 PhD students and like 10 master students, and the 3 PhD students, they were like the Muppet judges. They sat over on one corner in a row, and they just sort of dominated the class whenever they opened their mouths because they knew so much. And we had a balanced discussion and everything because they knew they didn't want to overrun the class or anything. But about halfway through the term, one of the master students was in my office, and he's like, "Who are those people? They're terrifying." And I was like, them? Because I'm sort of past the point where 3 PhD students can terrify me. I didn't see anything. I was like, what? Them? And he's like, they know everything. I was like, oh no, they're just PhD students, dude. Don't worry about it. You're not supposed to know all that stuff. He's like, oh, thank God. So it's as easy as that. Sometimes it's as easy as that. He didn't know what was going on. He was like, am I out of my element? What am I doing here? I was like, dude, those are PhD students. They already have a master's degree, like each one of them. So don't sweat it. And so, yes, reach out to your mentors and advisors and get a little pat on the back and some encouragement. Yeah, for sure.
All right. I don't think I see anything else I don't see any more hands raised. Jean said thank you, and yes, we will have to put this one at the top of our list because I think everybody really relates to it, and I'm glad that we were able to have this dialogue and for people to realize that they're not alone. And this is going to be something that when you're a grad student, you might have it might happen when you're at work, when you're changing jobs, like Trevor said. So it's going to come back, but you're going to get through it, and you're going to be able to find somebody awesome to talk to about it and find something great. That's, even if you're not presenting in front of groups of people and bouncing stuff off, like I've got my academic big brother who's listened to me more times than he probably wishes that I lost his number sometimes. But And he also, going with the co-authoring thing, he also co-authored a book chapter with me, which made it a lot more digestible. And we each brought, like, I brought my public health side, he brought his security side, and we had something that we were both pretty proud of. But when I thought about it, I called him first. I'm like, hey, you want to do this with me? Because I don't know about this. So find that person who can help you. And like we've all said, it could definitely be one of us who can give you that support. So thank you everybody who logged in tonight. Again, the next our next PHP webinar is going to be on the 6th, and that's going to be a student who graduated from our program, Mike Mitchell. So looking forward to that one. And before that, I'm just checking a calendar real quick. Our IAEM meeting is going to be on the 27th. If you are not on that distro and you want to be, please email me and I will make sure that you get on there. But if there are no other questions, then I hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Happy Valentine's Day, happy President's Day, and thank you all for coming. Have a great night.
Bye, guys. Thanks again, Jen. Gene, thanks so much.
Thank you.